Hi everyone, I'm Hazal, editorial executive for physical sciences at the Young Scientist Journal, and in this interview I'm joined by Dr. Clara Barker as part of our series for LGBTQ+ History Month. Dr. Barker is an engineer and material scientist currently managing the Center for Applied Superconductivity at the University of Oxford. She specializes in thin films, having completed a PhD in the subject. She is also an advocate for LGBTQ+ rights and currently chair for the LGBT Advisory Group at Oxford. And now, without further ado, let's jump into the interview. Okay, so first of all, very general question, but how did you get involved in material sciences, and specifically what led you to study thin films?
I did so by accident, completely by accident. So I actually left school early. I didn't finish the UK schooling system all the way because I had a lot of issues with my mental health, and a lot of that was related to my gender dysphoria, being trans. And this was the 90s, so the world was a very different place back then, which meant that no one really talked about it. So I didn't finish my A-levels, which are what you're expected to do in the UK. I then spent a few years just working in bars and DJing and lifeguarding and things like that. And then I wanted to get back into education. I always had a passion for science. I was always good at it, and I just wanted to get back. So I decided I wanted to do robotics. That was where I was going. So I signed up to get onto, I had to do a foundation year in engineering, which is a way of getting onto university degrees if you haven't already sort of done the normal schooling. And then, I planned on doing robotics, but then the courses all shut down in the areas that I wanted to go to the year that I applied. Go figure. So I ended up doing electrical engineering as a more general thing. And then I did a year placement working for a company as an electrical engineer designing equipment. And the company made vacuum deposition equipment, which I didn't know what that was. I thought it was something for helping cleaning the house. But it turns out that it was a material engineering company, and they actually made the machines that put the metal on the inside of crisp packets to keep your crisps fresh. You'd be surprised how much science was going into that. So I found out about material science, material engineering, and I got really fascinated in the material side of it. So I managed to sort of wiggle my way into working on the materials processing. I got out of the electrical design and into the materials side, and I just really enjoyed it. And then I went back to the company once I'd finished my degree, and somebody basically said you should do a PhD, and there was a project that came up, and so I went to do it, and I've not looked back. I'm still here, still different location, but similar stuff.
That is really cool. I don't know, I've always loved hearing about scientists' kind of origin stories. And this is not really on my question list, but I was kind of curious. Would you say that the jobs you did kind of outside of science, like bartending and being a lifeguard, the skills you learned there, would you say they've helped you in your career in science?
I think there were certain things that definitely helped me. So the sort of science I do, there's a lot of times where you've just got to watch and be patient and keep an eye on things and make sure that things don't break. And so obviously as a lifeguard for years, that's kind of what I was doing. So I'm very good at noticing when equipment sort of stops working properly, because it looks like I've zoned out, but then I just know, I'm actually got this weird glance and I can see. So there's definitely something there. I will say, having worked in the managed a bar I learned more about sort of people skills. I think that that's a lot that we don't necessarily, and it's same with lifeguarding and swimming teaching as well. We don't necessarily learn those people skills as scientists or engineers. So I think it was really good for me to be in public facing roles and management roles where it was my job to think about how I talk to people. So I think that I probably learned a lot of people skills that wouldn't necessarily have had otherwise. Also, working in the bar showed that I'm quite happy working late nights as opposed to early mornings. So, whenever I can, I'll work the late nights.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, I'm kind of a believer in like combining, I guess, humanities and social stuff and sciences, and I feel like, every scientist should have, to a certain extent, like social skills or like knowledge in other areas. So I think that's a
I
very
agree.
valuable experience.
Yeah.
So continuing off my questions, who were some of your role models growing up?
I think this was something that was really difficult. I didn't really have those role models. The role models that I had weren't necessarily, they weren't scientists or academics, because again, in the 80s, we didn't, in the UK, it was actually illegal to talk, sort of highlight LGBT role models. The only people that you heard talking about were classed as, abominations or, like insurrectionists or something like that. It was the only times you heard LGBT people being talked about, it was negatively. And within science and engineering, certainly that didn't change. And I think as I was, when I was growing up and doing science, it was a very straight white field that we learned about when it came to scientists. So I had an image in my head of what a scientist was, and that was it. And I think that stuck with me for a lot longer than I realized. So it actually took a long time for me to sort of develop heroes, as it was, and role models. The people that I kind of looked up to then were maybe sort of more gender fluid, and people like musicians like David Bowie, and there was other people like that. There was a band called the Manic Street Preachers. There was a few bands where they really, they didn't care what clothes they were wearing. They didn't care about their gender expression. They were just fluid and wore whatever they want. It's always a little bit difficult in the current world, because the more you hear about the sort of rock stars of the 70s and 80s and 90s, the more problematic they become as we unearth their history. But at the time, seeing someone, men wearing makeup was it was huge. It was huge to me.
Yeah,
so,
for
yeah.
sure. Yeah, I completely agree with all of that. I feel like, as an LGBT person myself, I've always found it kind of easier to relate to like more artistic, wait, is that a word? Artistic people, because I feel like it's kind of like about self-expression. So I haven't seen a lot of scientists who are LGBT in the media, but now, like, over the years, of course, with that being increased, it's kind of like, it's very inspiring to see more scientists coming out as LGBT, and kind of talking about their whole experiences.
Yeah, it's really good, and there's definitely more and more, but it's something that's only really picked up over the last couple of years. And
Yeah.
of course, we can't go back through the history books and find LGBT role models, because if they weren't out, we're never going to know. We can speculate, but we should never be speculating about people's gender identity. So, it's really difficult. And yeah, to sort of follow on with that, one of the big inspirations when I was deciding to transition, it was another musician, Laura Jane Grace, from a punk band Against Me. It was great to see someone that was my age and that was into the same music as me transition. And that was because often when you see, especially on YouTube, a few years back, all the trans YouTubers were all like really young, pretty things. And it was like, well, I'm this old, old grumpy thing. I needed someone a bit more representative of me. So Laura Jane Grace was huge inspiration. I will say that about 15 to 20 years ago, I saw Dame Jocelyn Bell Brunel speak. And Dame Jocelyn Bell Brunel was the head of the Institute of Physics in the UK, which is the main learned society for physics in the UK. And when I saw her speak, I mean, it blew away the preconceptions I had that it could only be men that were physicists. And not only was she a physicist and a famous one, but she was the head of the Institute of Physics. And listening to her talk about the struggles and fighting through that, you know, she discovered pulsars, but it was her male colleagues that got the Nobel Prize, not her. And so Dame Jocelyn Bell Brunel has been someone that's just like, she's not LGBT, although she does come to events that I put on in Oxford, which is really cool. But yeah, no, she's a huge inspiration, and she was the first person that really broke the stereotypes and made me think that maybe science could be a little bit more diverse.
Yes, I think we're definitely getting there, and I'm like, yeah, very hopeful for kind of future generations, and hopefully, you know, in the future I'll also be, you know, someone who inspires others to pursue a field that they typically don't see themselves represented in.
Yeah.
So there are two questions kind of about the work you do, and the first one is, so you said you manage the Center for Applied Superconductivity. So what research goes on there?
Yeah, so we call it the Centre for Applied Superconductivity, and that's a huge part of what we do. But there's two main areas that we've got a lot of active research going on in at the moment. So one side is superconductors, as you can probably guess from the name. So we're making different bulk superconductors for different applications. But we're also making thin film superconductors, so they could be used for superconducting tapes, in fusion generators, in MRI machines. I'm actually just making some superconductors that we're hoping to use in quantum computing as resonators, which I didn't realize was a thing that we needed superconductors for until very recently. So we're always learning, no matter what stage we're at. So that's sort of obviously where the group gets its name from. But we also have an awful lot of work going on into the research of thin solid state batteries as well. So we have quite a lot of people working with various lithium materials trying to make the future batteries for our mobile phones and whatever else. We actually have an entire building dedicated to that research. But we also have some extra stuff going on in our lab. So we've got I think there's about 4 or 5 research students at the moment all looking into that in our lab.
Okay, that's very cool. This is kind of like very related to or kind of like related to what you touched upon a bit. But like, what are some of the applications of superconductivity to different industries and other areas?
Yeah, so I think it's going to be one of those sort of things where it's, you know, it's not like we're going to be using superconductors everywhere, but where we do, we're probably going to be using quite a lot of them. So, so the main commercial use for superconductors right now is MRI machines in hospitals. All MRI machines have, well, big, huge semiconducting magnets, which is how they get the hydrogen in our bodies to line up so that we can take images. And so, so that's the main commercial application of superconductors, and it's big business. But then the other thing that we're heavily using them for, so we can use them in particle accelerators, so things like CERN, in Large Hadron Collider, there's a whole bunch of superconductors in there. An awful lot of superconductors. I think most of the world's titanium nitride has gone into CERN. So they use them for sort of bending the beam path and things like that. But then also we're looking at the future of energy, and one of those potential supplies of energy is fusion energy. And so fusion energy relies quite heavily on very, very strong strong magnetic fields for confining the plasma. and you can only really get that with superconductors. So hopefully we're helping with the future of energy production, but who knows? So right now there'll be an awful lot of superconductors that are being made that are going to ITER in wherever that's being built. I've forgotten the country, but yeah, wherever that's being built. Pardon?
I think it was France, but I'm not too sure. I can't remember well either.
Yeah, I'm thinking France as well, but that seems so close to CERN. But yeah, probably. So in fact, actually, we have a PhD researcher out there right now who's working on advanced materials for tokamaks for fusion energy. So yeah, but then there is also, it's kind of interesting. So quantum computing is a potential for the future. It's a potential way of sort of keeping data secure and things like that, and handling fast data processing. And it's definitely a big thing. And there's a whole different bunch of approaches on how to do it, but one of them is using superconducting resonators. So whether that's going to be something, I don't know, but I'm kind of hoping so, because that's what my current project is. My main focus is making those materials. So it's my job to make them good and then make sure that people use them.
Okay, cool. Okay. So the next question is, what inspired you to start your YouTube channel?
So I've always been interested in social justice. And I think I said before that I didn't necessarily see people that represented me, and I didn't necessarily see people that, so there's an awful lot of LGBTI plus, there's a lot of trans people out there, but you know, as we know, that we're all different. And so it's good to have a range of voices. And so I just hoped that, you know, maybe my voice would be another voice for people to listen to. Maybe they'd want to, maybe not. But then it really kickstarted. So towards the end of 2019, I started trying to explain my science with animations, really basic animations. I am not by any means an animator, you know, I am not, but I think I can do basic principles to show how things work. And I realized that that's a very visual thing. So for people with visual impairments, you've got to explain them too. But yeah, I just started making, for all my presentations, I just started making these animations, and people were responding really well to them. So then I thought, well, let's record these talks on, you know, superconductors, on fusion generators, on particle accelerators, on deposition techniques. I started recording them for YouTube. And of course, there was 2 months at the beginning of, you know, around 12 months ago, you know, March 2020, our lab was shut for 2 months. So it made it very difficult to do research because the lab was closed. So I sort of had more time to learn how to sort of refine my animations and then record them and upload them in different ways. So yeah, I started it was a combination of wanting to doing it, having the animations already for talks that I'd done in person, and yeah, just having the time to do it really. And then I started doing kind of podcasty chats with other scientists as well, just to show that there are different scientists out there, that there is not a single type of scientist. And so what I want to do is, with that, is that a lot of the people that are on it tend to be approached because they're black, because they're a woman, because they're LGBT. And they don't get to talk about their science much. So like I make sure the focus is like science first. So I chat to them for about 40 minutes about their research. But then I also talk about, yeah, but you're here because you're an awesome, you know, role model. And let's talk about diversity as well. So, and I continued with the social justice rants because I think we still need them. And I also do nerdy stuff like board games as well, because I'm a big old nerd. And it's really important for people to remember that we've got to have a life outside of science. And so so it's really good for me to actually do stuff that is a hobby, and sort of, you know, make sure that I'm talking on board game channels and stuff just for the fun of it.
Yeah, cool. I feel like YouTube is such a good medium for kind of communicating science and bringing people together and bringing like different people together, like people who've had various experiences throughout their lifetime. And I've certainly learned a lot of science, a lot of social justice issues from YouTube. So I feel like it's a great platform. Well, not always great, but it can be great. I should put it that way.
No, you're right. I completely agree. I think it is great, but it's got its dark side. It's got its bad
Yeah,
side.
it's got its dark side.
But I know that, I'm absolutely certain that if I'd had YouTube when I was okay, I grew up in a world pre-internet. Like, we didn't quite have the internet when I was young, and if we'd have had YouTube when I was younger, that would have been so transformative for me. So YouTube is awesome. We just
Yes,
need to
for sure.
make it more awesome.
Yeah, exactly. So what are your goals as the chair for the LGBT plus advisory group at Oxford University?
So, I mean, a lot of what we do is going to meetings. It's, every time people are talking about, say, gender balance, and it's like, oh, yes, let's remember that there's not just two genders, when people are saying, oh, it's very difficult, what about caring? Because the man always goes to work and the woman looks after the children. And I'm like, well, what about if it's two men? And what about if it's two women? How does that work? So a big part of it is sort of trying to remind them, like, hey, let's try and broaden out our language. Let's try and go gender neutral when we're writing job descriptions. So I spend a lot of time talking to people, but it's good. We've got a voice sort of all the way up the university. So people are listening to me that wouldn't have known who I was otherwise. So that's kind of nice. And what's been really good is, so I try and work with the other advisory groups. So there's disability and then there's a race one. And so we try and work together and make sure that we're highlighting each other's issues and working together. And so we really want to sort of make sure that because no one wants to fix things for one group and one group only. Because if you only fix things for one group, you're probably making them worse for another group. But also, intersectional people exist. There are Black trans people out there. There are, disabled Indian people out there. So it's working together and trying to sort of look at things intersectionally and make sure that we're not accidentally making it worse for other people is really, really important. So it's good to have that voice. It's good to get listened to. And I'll be perfectly honest that so obviously there was a lot of increased awareness around Black Lives Matter last year. And that was great because I think that people's approaches, if I used to say we need to take radical action in a meeting, people used to look at me with fear. But now when I say it, people nod. And so, okay, we're still nodding. We might not have it actually done, but we are moving forward. And so that's what, obviously I don't want violence. I don't want people to get hurt and all this lot, but it shows that actually things like Black Lives Matter do make a difference. And there is power in those sort of movements. So I spend all my activism trying to do peaceful things and working with people, but it doesn't mean that protesting and making a noise and being seen, we've got to do it all. And so that really helped me to be able to do what I'm doing because of that increased visibility. So that's kind of cool. That's brilliant. We do also put on a few lectures a year as well. So we put on a couple of talks. So in fact, we've got one, I guess, next Tuesday with a couple of, so we've got two athletes who are openly gay, who are Stonewall School role models. They're Stonewall role models, rather. And so we're going to be hearing about their experiences, which I'm sure will be interesting. And so it'll be really good to hear their perspectives. We really try and sort of mix. We only put on that lecture once a year, so it's not like So we try, yeah, our diversity of speakers has to be on a very long-term basis. So last year we had someone who was talking very much about disability and growing up in care and her experiences of that. And then this year we've got two people who are talking about their experiences in sport, especially as BIPOC people. And so it should be really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, that does sound very interesting. And you mentioned intersectionality, which is, I just love the whole concept of intersectionality so much. And I feel like it's gotten a lot of traction the last few years. Like about 4 years ago, I had never heard of the term, but then I heard of it, and I feel like it's spread a lot. Maybe not to people who are too outside the social justice part of things, but I think it has spread a lot. And it's very nice to see all that.
Yeah, it's there are people that have more than one characteristic, as it were. But then the other thing is just working together. It just gives us such a more powerful voice. It makes sure that we're not disadvantaging other groups, and it just gives us so much more strength. So I'm part of a group of STEM academics in the UK who, so it's called the Inclusion Group for Equity and Research in STEM. We're called the Tigers, because of course. And we started working together about 2 years ago. And so we've got people in all different career stages, all different sciences, but also from all different backgrounds. So we have experts in gender, in race, in religion. We've got a whole bunch of different perspectives. And that's been a really powerful group for me because it means that if I have questions, if I'm getting something wrong, someone calls me out on, something I've said about race or something, I know that I can go to people and say, hey, okay, right, I screwed up. What did I do wrong? How did I do this? And they do, they'll come to me as well for the thing. So that's really good. Just people keep on saying you can't have a civil discussion about, different groups of people. That's not true. We've proved that you can, and we have that forum to be able to do it. And I've learned so much about other groups from those people, and also we're a pretty big force now, because once you've got that real interdisciplinary thing, the different career levels, all different groups, we've pulled together on our website a whole bunch of resources on all sorts of different diversity issues. It's mostly focused on the UK, but not completely. And it helps us push for change. It helps us, we're taken seriously by funding bodies, by learning societies and things. So it gets us into places where, like I say, we wouldn't, individually fighting for our own little, if I was just fighting for trans rights, I'd never be there. But fighting for diversity, inclusion, equity, now we're there. And so that's great.
Yeah. So you touched a bit about furthering diversity in academia and furthering diversity in STEM fields. What else do you think could be done to increase diversity in science?
Yeah, it's always difficult. I mean, there's definitely certain steps that we can take, some of the examples I give is that, I've been around so many engineering buildings that say, on physics buildings that say, we want more women in STEM. We don't understand why they're not taking up STEM. And then you go on the open day tours and they've got the women's bathrooms are every 3 floors and the men's are on every floor. And it's like, well, that kind of suggests who you want here. How many times have I been to a building and they say, oh, we're fully accessible. And then you find out that for people with mobility issues, it's the wheelchair access is round the back maybe, and it doesn't always work, or it's not covered from the rain like the front entrance is. It's kind of, you say that you're sort of accessible, but you're not. So we've got to stop reacting. We shouldn't be making changes to our labs and our buildings once someone says, I've got this accessibility need. We should be doing it ready so that if someone wants to come to us, then it's already in place. And that can be really hard. I work in labs where we've got an awful lot of big machinery. the truth is it's not an accessible lab, and I don't know how we can make it more accessible. But it doesn't mean that I'm not thinking about it, and it doesn't mean that I don't at least want to try. It is difficult, but we should never worry about it being difficult. It's just, but certainly when it comes to the basic labs, the basic rooms, the basic routes, you know, let's get people in the building. Let's allow people in and give them places to pee, which is a hot topic as a trans person. So yeah, it's just doing things like that, and then just celebrating our role models as well. We know that. So look, science isn't diverse. There's, you know, the numbers show that like the percentage of BAME people are way lower than they are for white people. We've got all the percentages. We know we're losing people with disabilities all along the line, LGBT people. We've got this data now. At least we're being honest about it. That's good. We're starting to talk about it. We're starting to be honest, because it was so easy in the past to say we don't have an issue, so we don't put data out. And then, of course, if there's no data, when you tell people there's a problem, people are like, no, there's not. There's no data on it. So having data and being honest is such an important first step. But then making sure that, so like I say, we have a deficit. You know, women make up 23% of people in STEM. I mean, non-binary numbers are much smaller, but that's because it's much smaller anyway. But we've got this deficit. So we have to take positive action, and maybe we do need to sort of use our role models, our people in the departments, an awful lot more if they've got those, you know, particular characteristics. Because showing that we can be diverse, showing that we are diverse, can help bring more people in. So over time, that balance will reduce. But we've got to be really careful about how we do it. So we can't just go up to someone and say, hey, you're black, therefore you're going to be doing this talk, you know, this talk. It's like, no, make sure the person wants to do it first. Then when we do that, when we do have our diverse role models, we need to make sure that they're not just tokenistic. So the tokenistic people are the people that, will you pose for this photograph? Will you do this tour? Will you write this article? And then that's it. But if you're actually supporting those role models, then you give them time off from their work to be able to do that extra work. You actually treat the outreach as just as important as a scientific experiment. You give them the funding to be able to put on speakers. You pay them for their time. You know, on the surface, you've got a few people that you're sort of giving a highlighted platform to, but it's how you treat those people that makes the difference between sort of actually doing it for positive change and just doing it to look good. And so that's what we've got to really, and I think we're still in this point where we're not quite there. We're still doing the tokenistic thing, but things are changing and more power is going to our, you know, diverse workforce. So that's good. It's moving forward. It's moving forward.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like, you know, there's always, you always have to start somewhere, and just, you know, starting a discussion, or even it just like looking into things, listening to people from marginalized communities, and, you know, having discussions with them. All of those are just ways to both like learn how to be more inclusive and spread that inclusivity to other people. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, and you know, touching on what I said before, we can't be scared of getting things wrong, because we get things wrong. Like I'm still learning. If we weren't still learning things, I would have no job as a scientist, because everything would be discovered. So of course we're still learning, and there's nothing wrong with. I know that you'll see some people say, "Oh, you should know the right words. You should know how to treat this group or that group," and that's. I mean, it's fair to a certain degree. Some of it is really obvious and basic, but there are a lot of complexities. But I think that people are so scared of getting it wrong and being called out that they get really defensive and they go the wrong way, like they try and overcorrect. And what we've got to be able to do is, you know, I got called out for something about, 12 months ago. And I was like, oh, wow, I just didn't realize. And I apologized and I learned from that. And then I did a bit of research to figure out, okay, let's not do that again. And so it was a learning experience for me. But so many people I know, like they see criticism as in they just can't take the criticism. And we've got to learn to just be willing to be like, okay, we've got something wrong. Let's learn from this. Let's move on. So, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. For sure. So kind of a little bit changing topics, but you talked a bit about this in the beginning, but I want to ask, what do you think of the portrayal / representation of LGBTQ plus people in history, particularly the history of science?
Lacking. Yeah, I mean, it's really difficult. There's probably more, there's definitely some, but the truth of the matter is, like, so many people kept themselves to themselves. They didn't come out as openly LGBTI plus. They just didn't. So we just don't have those role models. The few that we have are usually fairly tragic stories. So the example of Alan Turing, he was a fantastic mathematician, but he was outed as being gay by the law because it was illegal at the time, and chemically castrated, and then took his own life. And he was still working. He was young. He wasn't finished. And we would, if he'd have never been caught by the police, then we'd have never known that he was gay. He probably would have taken that to, with him. So, that's one of those tragic stories. Another one is, so Sally Ride, the astronaut, the US astronaut and physicist, an amazing person, but, she wasn't openly gay. A lot of people, when she died, I think a lot of people didn't know that she'd been with the same woman for 27 years because she'd always been introduced as a friend or whatever else. And that's really sad. Like, you're going to these high-level events and you're being celebrated and you're just hiding who you are. You can't share that with the person that you love most. And she had a fantastic career, and absolutely. But it's just a real shame that there's certain ways where you're not sharing your life with, you're not, you just want to do things differently, and she didn't have that chance. So I always feel that these stories are fairly tragic, I think. It's just where we're at the moment. It's just where we're at the moment. And this is why it's so important to be trying to promote our current role models, because I think we've got such a deficit. It's similar with people with sort of hidden disabilities as well, or neurodivergent people. Unless they say I'm autistic or whatever, you're just never going to know. So we can't go through the history books and pull out those role models. So again, we just need more role models now, I think.
Yes, definitely. So kind of taking into consideration all the things we've talked about, what would be your advice to LGBTQ plus youth who are like hoping to pursue a career in STEM, whether that be like research oriented or like more in academia?
So I'm going to say that anyone could be a scientist. You absolutely can. Like, if you've got the passion and you're willing to put the work in, I'm not saying that you have to work all evenings and all weekends. That's that whole academic side, I think, is really toxic. But anyone that is willing to, you've got to be good at it. You've got to, and you've got to work hard. There's no two ways about it. But anyone can be a scientist. Now, the world's improving, and it's improving fast as well. Like, it's actually the differences that I've seen in the last 5 years. It's so fast. I know it might not seem it if you're younger, but as an old person, I can, I see what's happened and I see how different it is, and I'm really happy with how things are going. Doesn't mean it's not great to do things faster, but it's good. So those dissenting voices, I think, are becoming less and less. They're still there and they're still very vocal and they're still given a platform.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't mean that you're not going to end up in a lab with a completely sexist or homophobic professor. You know, I mean, that can still absolutely happen. So, but I think that more people have an idea of what is and isn't acceptable, and so they know how to complain. The systems are getting better, not great, but better. Also, you know, we're global. We can ask, if I come and work in this lab, is the dude that works there a creep or not? You know, like, we can actually sort of do our research on who we're going to work with. And that's one of the wonderful things about, especially, so there's a big, huge academic, scientific group on Twitter. Like, you know, it's really thriving. Twitter, again, can be toxic, but it can be amazing. And so I've got all these groups, like, globally, and I can say, like, I want to come and work with this group. What are they like? I can do my research. I can get the support of other people and say, this has happened to me. Is this acceptable? Is this normal? Or is this just this group? We have access to more information on people than ever before. And so we can really use that to our advantage. And like I say, we're improving. It's improving much faster than you might think. It's still slow, but it's way faster, and it's been gaining steam. We always have setbacks, you know. There was a lot of setbacks in the United States for LGBTI. Hungary has setbacks at the moment for trans people. Poland, there's other countries. I think there's a lot of issues, culture wars in Turkey at the moment as well, from what I understand. So there are countries where things are going backwards, and the UK is definitely, it's gone backwards in the last couple of years, but generally public perception has moved forward. The way we do things has moved forward. It's just some people in power that have changed things to make it worse. But generally, there's more acceptance than ever before for trans people, for LGBTI plus people. So things are moving forward. Always depends on the country. It does. But I think the world is looking rosier right now. I think it's just getting better and better. So as horrible as things can be sometimes.
Yeah. I feel like as an kind of, I guess, observer of science Twitter or like academia Twitter, I've seen the amount of tweets or like people who have promoted social justice issues or talked about LGBTQ plus issues, the Black Lives Matter movement. All of that has been amazing, and it really, like, I think it really is showing how more inclusive science is becoming, and that just makes me so happy.
Yeah, and so the learned societies are doing more. So in the UK, that's the Royal Society of Chemistry and the Royal Society and the Institute of Physics and a whole bunch of others. In America, the American Physical Society, they were going to determine, they were going to look at police brutality rates in the states when they were deciding which states to hold their conference, because they know that it affects certain races above more than others. And so they were doing that. That's not about excluding people. That's about making it more inclusive, welcoming more people in. When it comes to our conferences, we've got to make sure that they're not being held in countries where it's homophobic, where it's illegal to be gay, maybe. The global pandemic and COVID is horrible, and there's a whole bunch of downsides to it. But one positive is that we've been doing more conferences online. And as much as I miss my friends and I really want to give them all hugs and, you know, hang out with them, people are able to attend events that they weren't able to attend before. So maybe it's people with chronic illnesses or disabilities. Maybe it's people in different countries. But I did a talk for the Royal Society of Chemistry in December. And because it was a chemistry event, people could come to it. And so I was speaking to some people in the chat who were in a country where it's illegal to be gay. And they could never have gone to an LGBT event, but they could come to a chemistry event And so I was the first LGBT person they'd seen talking openly, and it was just, that was amazing. Like that was so amazing to see, and yeah, that was just glorious. And I guess at the end of 2019, I went to a conference in northern Cyprus, and there was a whole bunch of activists from Turkey there who had come over, and it was just hearing what was going on in that country, because you read on the news and stuff, but it was yeah, some of those people, I don't know. I know that I go up against Twitter trolls who are trying to take away my rights, and they are. And then I hear stories from different countries, and I'm like, whoa, wow. It really checks my privilege, you know? And it's amazing and inspiring to meet all those other people. So yeah, this global mobility and being online is really awesome.
Yeah, I completely agree. I feel like I've made a lot of friends during the pandemic, and as you said though, like it's definitely been horrible, and both not being able to go outside, not being able to see friends, and
Yeah.
the whole, I guess I don't want to say anything mean, but like people not wearing masks and all that mess and
Yep.
politics and whatnot. It's just been amazing being able to meet people online.
Yeah, it's good. I actually got my COVID vaccine yesterday.
Oh, yay.
Yeah,
That's
it was
cool.
just last night. Yeah, the usual anti-vaccine conspiracy theorists and stuff like that. But yeah, no, definitely. There's been positives. There can be positives. Anyone that's lost family or ended up in hospital, yeah, I wish that hadn't have happened. But I can see the positives and the benefits as well. So, and I mean, I've been in my lab most of the time. I only had a couple of months off. So, yeah.